interviews. This is a 4-part series, and we're in our 3rd part of this presentation. So here is the overview of what we're going to talk about today. We are going to discuss a very short summary of what we discussed in part 2. We're going to talk a little bit about what the STAR method is, because that was something that we discussed last week that was super important. We're going to discuss the differences between virtual and traditional interviews. Then we're going to talk about the similarities between them. We're going to talk about how to set up for a virtual interview, so getting ready, getting your space ready. What you want to watch during interviews, so the do's and the don'ts. We're going to discuss a little bit about the phone interview, and then we're going to talk about the impossible question. So let's get started here. So in our past series, we talked about writing applications, resumes, cover letters. So we were done with that. Check. Then we discussed what to bring to an interview, being overall prepared. So we did that. Check. Today, we're going to talk about our virtual interviews. And next week, we're going to talk about our in-person interviews. So I just want to do a quick summary of what we talked about in our last presentation, just to kind of catch you up in case there's something that you wanted to see, and you can view our past presentations on our YouTube channel. So we discussed why interviewing and preparation is so important, super important to be practice. Practice makes perfect. You want to read your content before you go into your interview. You want to understand what you're applying for. So really read through and make sure that you know what you're applying to. You want to have your questions and answers prepared ahead of time. And when you think about your answers, you want to think about the STAR method. And we talked a little bit about that today. We're just going to go over that really quickly. And then we talked about putting it all together. So that is what we discussed. Let's move on to what is the STAR method. So just like we talked about last week, the STAR method is an acronym, STAR, and it stands for, S stands for the situation. You want to describe what happened. Tell the person exactly what happened so that they can kind of get some context to help them understand why you're so amazing. Then you want to talk about the task, and you want to describe what you did. So physically, how you did an amazing job of taking care of a situation. Then you want to talk about the actual action, so how you acted in that situation. The R stands for results. So you want to describe what happened at the end. You want to talk about the positives and what you've learned. And you can watch our previous videos to kind of learn more about like what that is going forward. So I was supposed to have an HR expert on here today. They canceled at the last minute, but I wanted to make sure that I shared some of their tips. So we're going to cover some of these today, but I just wanted to talk them through. So somebody suggested that you want to look the part, you want to be clean and tidy. You want to be somebody who the company is going to be proud for their customers to see if they're a forward-facing company. You want to understand your resume. So like we talked about in the last one, they may ask you some questions to confirm what's like what you've done. And so you want to be ready to answer those. You want to read the job ad and find where you fit into that. Again, we discussed visiting the company website and being able to articulate what they do. The other thing they recommended is knowing your strengths. So be aware of what your strengths are. What is your learning style? Are you a good presenter? Do you like to bring people together to make a better team? Are you good at problem solving or synthesizing data? So some companies use something called behavioral interviewing, and there is a formula and you can look it up online. The other thing that they wanted to share is that every company is a little bit different. And so there's no right way of doing this. Every person is a little different. So you want to be the right piece for the company's puzzle. So now we're going to move on to the when we talk about virtual and traditional interviews, there's some factors that you want to consider. So you want to consider the fact, you want to consider cost, you want to consider approach, their hiring process, interaction, place, and presentation. And I have a short slide. It's a citation I found from another website, which was really useful. And it just showed basically a virtual interview and in-person interview and kind of how they're, you know, kind of how they compare. So I just want to put that up just for a moment. Read through that. Okay, so now I want to break it down. The differences between a virtual and a traditional interview. So a benefit of the virtual interview is that you're in a safe space. So you're probably at your house or somewhere where you feel comfortable. So it's going to help you with, being calm, avoiding any feeling nervous. And there's no awkward waiting in the lobby beforehand, which can sometimes be really awkward. So virtual interviews are really positive for that. The virtual interview allows you to view the space you would be working in. So often if they're interviewing you, they've got, the space behind them. So you can kind of see what, see the culture, see potential coworkers, see, if they have a uniform or whatever. And then this gives you an idea of what to expect within the workplace. And that can play in your decision as to whether it's the right fit for you. The timeline between interviews. So if there are multiple at times, they can slightly speed up due to the ability for the interviewers to connect virtually. And there is a benefit because sometimes you can wait only a couple of days versus weeks because they can kind of make those decisions a lot faster. They don't have to wait for people to drive places. With the removal of the commute times in virtual interviews, there's more of an open pool for candidates, allowing for greater chance for you to land that first interview. So those are some differences. Some similarities now. You still need to do your preparation. You still need to research your questions. You still need to research the company. And this is always going to be important. The breakdown of the traditional interview still applies to the virtual interview in terms of how the interview plays out. So you have the same expectations from both the candidate and the interviewer when they ask and answer the questions. It's just obviously it's virtual. So now I want to talk a little bit about how you set up your space for your virtual interview. You want to set up in a quiet area. So you want to avoid like background noise, like for example, people in the kitchen, people talking, TVs, that sort of thing. You want to set up your background. You want to have good lighting. One of the notes was you don't want to wash out, but you also don't want to be too dark. And I'm going to give a little example here. So I'm working at a stand-up desk now. And last week I had a sit-down desk. And so when I stood up, I had this big window that's actually washing me out. So I had to kind of move around to make sure that I was still, you could still see me. So you just want to be aware of natural light versus regular light. So some tips for lighting. You want to block any natural light as best you can, but sometimes it helps and sometimes it hinders. So you want to use your, if you can try, place and arrange yourself so that natural light is not directly on your face. And that's always a really good idea. And then you want to minimize the distractions in your background. You want to keep it neat and tidy. You want to center yourself in the frame of the camera, ideally chest up with some space above your head. So making sure that they can still see the top of your head. You want to have a drink in hand because it helps to avoid dry mouth. The other thing I wanted to mention is when you look at the camera, I don't know if you've ever kind of noticed this before, but if you look straight at the camera, and I'm looking at my camera right now, it actually looks awkward. So if you can, try to find where you're centered on the computer, and you may want to just put a sticky note on there just so you remind yourself where you're looking. I make videos for a YouTube channel, for an educational YouTube channel for teachers, and I had to kind of play around with where I put my sticky note to make sure that where I was looking in the camera was appropriate. So anyway, just some things to think about when you're preparing for your virtual interview. So what you want to just be aware of when you're doing your interview, so your body language. Just like when you're in person, you want to watch your posture. You want to have a straight back, your shoulders back. Talking with your hands is okay. Like it means that you're engaging. It's showing that you're interested. You want to nod along with whatever the interviewer is saying. Your tone, you want to keep it positive and upbeat. You want to avoid a monotone. Like they want to hear your as you're talking, how you get excited about certain things and when you end a sentence. Eye contact. So just like I just discussed, is you want to maintain eye contact with the person who is speaking. And so again, you want to do a test to see where you look so that you look like you're looking at the person rather than at the camera, rather than at, maybe something on your desk. But if there are multiple interviewers, and we're talking about eye contact here, you want to just go back and forth between the two people. And if somebody's asking you a question, you want to turn and face the other person that you're talking to, because sometimes you have multiple people that are interviewing. And it's always good to kind of face the way that, like who it is. You want to look at the camera, and you want to maintain eye contact. Another thing you want to consider is what's your resting face. So everybody has this neutral face, and sometimes neutral faces are not very attractive. So you want to just be aware, you want to maintain a slight smile. But all of this is really harder to do virtually. So just be patient with yourself and maybe practice a little bit in front of it. Some do's and don'ts for interviewing. So you want to, of course, be respectful, and you want to be engaged throughout the entire interview. You want to remember to thank them for their time. You want to come prepared with the items we talked about in part 2. You want to think about the responses before you answer. And it's okay to take a moment and collect your thoughts. You know, think about things for a minute. And nobody's going to fault you for just taking a moment and thinking about what you're going to say. In fact, they'll probably appreciate that you're reflecting and getting some good ideas in the silence. You want to dress to impress. So when you're doing a virtual interview, obviously you want to make sure that the top half is nicer, but we still recommend that the bottom half is presentable in case you stand up by accident for whatever reason. You don't want to, there's lots of stories online about, people in their underwear. So anyway, a couple of don'ts. So you don't want to interrupt the interviewer. Obviously you don't want to use any foul language or inappropriate jokes. You also don't want to be overconfident. Because you can often come off feeling come off as entitled. You don't want to dress down. It's always better to be overdressed. You obviously, this is without saying, you don't want to talk about past employers or experiences that you had. You don't want to speak negatively about that. Well, let's see. I just have some comments here. So you want to be confident, but again, like I said, not overconfident. You want to be able to talk about yourself and who you are. When they say, tell us about yourself, you want to come prepared with questions to ask them about the company, the culture, ask them why they like working at the place, and how do they measure success in the position. You also want to know how to answer why you want to work there. So get that answer in your head. Think about your responses before you answer. It's okay to take a moment to collect your thoughts, and do not forget them to thank them for their time. Phone interviews. For part-time jobs, it's pretty rare to have a phone interview, but it may happen from time to time. So there's usually a preliminary interview. The interviewer wants to know your experience, expectations of the job. They want you to understand the role in the company and what you're going to be doing. And often these are short, lasting between 10 and 30 minutes. Preparing ahead for the phone interview is still recommended. And so having that job description accessible and information about the company is super important. I want to talk a little bit about the impossible question. So sometimes employers, and even like if you're applying for like post-secondary or other types of interviews, they ask you a question that yourself is impossible to answer. And so how you handle this is a perfect time to take a deep breath and think about your answer and say, can you give me a moment to think about that? You want to answer it to the best of your abilities and think about that STAR method. So think about, the situation, the task, the action, and the result, and see if you can kind of add that into your answer. Thank you letters. So you are highly encouraged to do this. Emails, thank you letters, anything. It's recommended that you send an email within an hour of completing the interview, thanking both the person who set up the interview and the interviewers, if they were not the ones who set it up. In the event that you do not get the next interview or a job offer, you can always ask for feedback from the interviewers, because you want to find out how you can improve. Most people are very willing to help you if you ask. This is also a great chance to thank them again and to ask them to keep you in mind for future opportunities, especially if you made it through the first round of interviews. And I personally, I have lots of experiences with writing letters and emails. When I finished university, and I just finished university a couple of years ago, and I was applying for jobs, I always had in my car, like some empty letters, because I would have the interview and then I would go out to my car right away and I would write down a quick thank you note, letting them know. And often employers really appreciate, or even like people who are that interview you for a variety of different things, they really appreciate the time that you spend writing that. So I would write a quick, thank you. I would let them know that I appreciated. And then I would literally walk from my car, go back into the building and drop off the thank you note. And 9 times out of 10, if you were really close to, getting that job or getting that position or getting approved, then that often will tip you over the edge. Okay, so now I'll just open it up if anybody has any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and see if there's any questions in the chat. We have no questions so far, so I think I'm going to end this this presentation so far. I just want to thank you all for coming and listening, and I hope that you learned a lot from